Hello, students. We are going to start with the next part. We were in between somewhere, that is important concepts related to research design, and we have seen that there are dependent variables, independent variables. These terms you will see continuously whenever you are either prepare, or you need continuously whenever you are preparing research design, or you are trying to find out or you are trying to study another research design. So we have seen what is dependent variable, what is independent variable, what is continuous variable, what are discrete variables in the last lecture. We have also seen the examples for the same. And then we are going to proceed for the next, that is extraneous variable. Now, what is extraneous variable? It is the independent variable that are not related to the purpose of the study. So they are nowhere related or included into the purpose of study, but may affect the dependent variable, are termed as extraneous variable. So they are not directly related to the study or added into the study, included into the study, but still they affect on the dependent variable. They are called as extraneous variable. And for example, suppose a teacher wants to test the hypothesis. Now, what hypothesis she wants to test? That there is a relationship between children's gains in social studies or children's achievement in the social study and their self-concept. So what is their self-concept, and if their self-concept is correct, and because of that, whether they are getting good achievement into the social studies or not. Somehow it is like this, the hypothesis is. Now the self-concept is here independent variable, and social studies achievement is dependent on the self-concept. This is fine, but somewhere the most important variable has to be considered, that is the intelligence. So, because according to the intelligence, the student is going to perform finally, right? So, intelligence may affect on the social study achievement, but as it is not directly related to the purpose of the study undertaken by the teacher, this particular intelligence here termed as extraneous variable. Now, always remember that whenever or whatever effect is noticed of this extraneous variable on the dependent variable, it is technically termed as experimental error. So, whatever effect of extraneous variable is going to do on dependent variable, it is going to termed as or described as experimental error. You must have heard this word everywhere, that there is experimental error. This is what is the experimental error mean. And a study must always be so designed that the effort should be done in such a way that the dependent variable is attributed entirely to the independent variable and not to the extraneous variable. So extraneous variable, so whenever you're doing your research design, you have to take care in such a way that there should not be some extraneous variable or variables which are affecting directly or indirectly on your dependent variable and thus on independent variables. Now you will also see many a times whenever you are preparing, or you have to consider whenever you are preparing your experimental design, the control. Now what control means? It is a very important characteristics whenever you are deciding or trying to prepare a good research design. You have to always consider this control, because it minimizes the influence and effect of extraneous variable. So we have seen the experimental error, it means extraneous variable. So to minimize the effect of this particular variable, control is very important, because control will give you the whatever normal situations are there, and then your experimental situation or your experimental treatment, and the difference between the whatever your experimental situation is there and whatever is the normal situation is there, you can just compare it because of control only. So always the control will help to design the study in such a way that it will minimize the effects of extraneous independent variable, and thus the control is very important and always used in the experimental conditions. Then the co-founded relationship. Now, this also word you will be going to get across whenever you are going to prepare your experimental design, that when a dependent variable is not free. Now, free from what? It is not free from what? From the influence of extraneous variable. So whatever topic you take, whatever topic you have selected, it is just impossible that this extraneous variable is free from the dependent variable. Now, for example, hypothesis, if I make the hypothesis that coffee drinkers have more heart diseases than non-coffee drinkers. Now, here coffee drinkers are having heart diseases. That is what I am hypothesizing. And non-coffee drinkers are not having much heart diseases. But now a very big external factor or extraneous factor is important here is smoking. Because it may be like that coffee drinkers may smoke more cigarettes than non-coffee drinkers. And so smoking here is the in co-founded relationship. It is there in the relationship with the disease and even with the coffee drinking people. So this is what is actually called as co-founded relationship, and thus the relationship between dependent and independent variable is said to be co-founded by extraneous variable whenever such examples are there or whenever such situations are there, you have to consider this co-founded relationship too. Then the next is research hypothesis. You know very well what is research hypothesis. It is just the prediction or the hypothesized hypothesis which is giving you the relationship between the variable and dependent variable and independent variable, and the method by which you are going to uh, test it is actually called as research hypothesis, right? So usually there must be, when you are saying any hypothesis, research hypothesis, there must be dependent variable and there must be independent variable. So at least one dependent variable and one independent variable is must whenever you are preparing for your research hypothesis. Now, experimental hypothesis designing, hypothesis testing, research. Now, there are these concepts are there, or these terms are there which you are going to get across always, that is experimental hypothesis testing research and non-experimental hypothesis research. What it means, that is the now what is experimental hypothesis testing research means? Again, it is the research to test a research hypothesis, obviously, because it is the hypothesis testing research, and it can be of experimental design or of non-experimental design. So you can do or test it with lot many experiments, or you can just test it with the data where no experience is needed and you have just collected the data. Now this research in which actually the independent variable is manipulated is termed as experimental hypothesis testing research. So this is very important, that wherever the independent variable is manipulated in the research, in that particular research where the independent variable is manipulated is termed as experimental hypothesis testing research. Now how we can understand it? Just take the example that randomly select 50 students from a group of students and who will take a very special course of the statistics. Now divide these 50 students into two groups. label one group as of 25 student as group A, and another 25 students group, label it as a group B, and give group A usual study program of statistics and give group B special statistical study program, right? Now let them study it, and after a particular month, that is after 6 months, 6 months or 1 year, you are going to test each group in order to judge the effectiveness of the training program. And for that, you will take some test or exam, and with the results of exam, you are going to find it out that which group has performed the best one. Now, this is an example of experimental hypothesis testing research. Why? Because here the independent variable you are changing, as we have seen that the independent variable has to get manipulated. So here we are going to change, we have changed independent variable. For example, the type of training program is manipulated. What type of training program is? For group A, we have just given the usual statistical program, and for group B student, we have just given the special statistical study program, right? So we have manipulated the independent variable here. Now, the non-experimental hypothesis research, what it means? It means a research in which independent variable is not manipulated, like it is manipulated in the experimental hypothesis testing. It is not manipulated, which is called as non-experimental hypothesis testing research. Now again, we will take the example of 50 students, where suppose a researcher wants to study whether intelligence affects the reading ability for a group of students and for group of students. So intelligence and reading ability, that the particular researcher want to study, right? And to do that, he selects randomly 50 students, divide them into again two groups, group A, group B, and test their intelligence. How? Just give both the group of students are going to read the same text or different text, but they are just going to read it, right? And then calculate the coefficient of correlation between two sets and score. Now, this is an example of non-experimental hypothesis testing. Why? Because here the independent variable, what is independent variable? That is intelligence, right? And it is not manipulated. Intelligence, the students are going to read as per their intelligence only. Whether you divide them into 50 or you don't divide them into 50, right? So this is the difference between experimental hypothesis testing research and non-experimental hypothesis testing research. Then the next concept you will come across always is experimental and control group. So always experimental group is such a group where a special or novel treatment is given or a novel condition is provided to them, and control group is which is exposed to the usual conditions, normal conditions. So in the previous example, we have seen that the 50 student groups are divided into A and B, and A group has given usual statistical program studies, B group has given special one. So here B group is an experimental group and A group is the control group. So every study we need to consider these groups because without comparing between control and test, you cannot go to any conclusion. Then the treatments, you can give different conditions to the experimental groups, which are called as treatments actually. So treatments are always given to the experimental group, right? And always the non-treatment group is the control one. So for example, if we want to determine through an experiment that the comparative impact of the three varieties of fertilizers on the yield of wheat. Now, here I need to keep all three controls differently and three varieties of fertilizers will be treated as 3 different treatments. So here different varieties are there of the fertilizer, and you are going to see the effect of each variety. You are going to compare between each variety. You are also going to compare between each variety and control, and then you are going to conclude about the your whatever treatment you have given. Then the experiment, we all do experiment. So the process of examining the truth of statistical hypothesis relating to some research problem is actually scientifically, I can say that it is known as experiment. So generally, we do the experiment to examine the usefulness of certain newly developed drug, or again there are two types, that is absolute experiment and comparative experiment. Now in absolute experiment, for example, if we want to determine impact of fertilizer on the yield of crop, it is the case of absolute experiment. Current here we are just adding the fertilizer and finding out whether that particular crop is getting affected by the fertilizer or not. We are not doing any comparison. Addition of fertilizer and finding the effect. But if further we want to find out impact of one fertilizer as compared to the impact of other fertilizer, now we are going to compare here, right? Between one fertilizer and other fertilizer. This type of research is called as comparative research. Then experimental units. Now, the predetermined plots or blocks where generally the treatments are used, where you are going to give the treatment, those are called as experimental unit. For example, if animals are group housed in a cage, right? And all animals within that cage receive the same treatment. So animals are there. So for example, mice are there. I put 3, 4, 5, 6 mice in one cage, right? And I'm giving the same food, same water to them, or same whatever drug to all those mice in the cage. That is now here the experimental unit is cage for that animals. If I am doing it in the field, if I want to sow some plants or wheat or some another grain into the field, at that time also the field will be the experimental unit. So such experimental units must be selected very carefully. It depends on what kind of experiment you are going to do. Accordingly, you need to select the experimental units. Now you just enjoy the video about the experimental design, and then we will continue the lecture.
Hello friends, welcome to Knowledge Stairs. The topic for today's discussion is research design. चलिए शुरू करते हैं, लेकिन उससे पहले अगर आपने अब तक नॉलेज स्टेयर्स को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है तो सब्सक्राइब कर लें और साथ ही लगे बेल आइकन को भी प्रेस कर दें ताकि जब भी मैं कोई नया वीडियो अपलोड करूं आपको उसका नोटिफिकेशन फौरन मिल जाए। रिसर्च डिजाइन क्या होता है? रिसर्च डिजाइन किस चीज को हम कहते हैं रिसर्च डिजाइन? रिसर्च डिजाइन क्या होता है? किस चीज को, किस तरीके के बनाए हुए डिजाइन को हम रिसर्च डिजाइन कहेंगे? किस तरीके से बनाया जाता है, किस तरीके का डिजाइन होता है वो जिसे हम रिसर्च डिजाइन कहते हैं। तो रिसर्च डिजाइन क्या होता है? अ रिसर्च डिजाइन इज अ conceptual structure within which a research is conducted. ये क्या होता है? स्ट्रक्चर होता है, एक तरीका होता है जिसके अंतर्गत हमारी रिसर्च की जाती है, हम अपनी रिसर्च कंडक्ट करते हैं। इट कॉन्स्टिट्यूट्स अ ब्लूप्रिंट। ब्लूप्रिंट क्या चीज होती है? ब्लूप्रिंट कहते हैं एक ऐसे डिजाइन को, एक पैटर्न को जिसे हम फॉलो करते हैं आगे आने वाले काम में। तो ब्लूप्रिंट इट्स अ गाइड फॉर मेकिंग समथिंग। ब्लूप्रिंट, इसको नाम कहाँ से पड़ा ब्लूप्रिंट का? आर्किटेक्चर्स जो होते हैं अपनी डिजाइन जो करते हैं, वो घर का बिल्डिंग्स का किसी भी चीज का जो नक्शा बनाते हैं, वो जो इंक यूज करते हैं प्रिंट निकालने में, वो ब्लू कलर यूज करते हैं। ब्लू कलर की लाइंस वो ड्रॉ करते हैं फॉर मेकिंग अ कंस्ट्रक्शनल ड्राइंग्स। तो वहां से इस ब्लूप्रिंट का नाम पड़ा। वहां पर भी मकसद यही था ब्लूप्रिंट का कि ऐसे ये चीज, ये जो उन्होंने नक्शा बनाया है, इस तरीके से कंस्ट्रक्शन होगा, इस तरीके से घर या बिल्डिंग या जो भी चीज उन्होंने बनाई है वो इस तरीके से बनाई जाएगी। तो वहीं से ब्लूप्रिंट का नाम पड़ गया है। तो हम रिसर्च डिजाइन को भी क्या कहते हैं, इट्स अ ब्लूप्रिंट फॉर आवर रिसर्च। ब्लूप्रिंट यानी कि हमें ये बताता है कि हमारी रिसर्च हम किस तरीके से करेंगे। तो इट कॉन्स्टिट्यूट द ब्लूप्रिंट फॉर द कलेक्शन, मेजरमेंट एंड एनालिसिस ऑफ डेटा। हमें ये बताता है कि कैसे हमें अपना डेटा कलेक्ट करना है, कैसे उसे टेबुलर फॉर्म में डालना है, फिर उसे कैसे हम मेजर करेंगे और फाइनली कैसे एनालाइज करके अपना कंक्लूजन निकालेंगे। एक डायरेक्शन बताता है हमें रिसर्च डिजाइन। इट इंक्लूड्स एन आउटलाइन, एक आउटलाइन हमें देता है हमारे वर्क की। इट इंक्लूड्स एन आउटलाइन ऑफ व्हाट द रिसर्चर विल डू from writing the hypothesis to the final analysis of data.